Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to be talking about Topaz and Numby, who's just kind of chilling down there. If you guys don't already know, Topaz and Numby were just recently released, and today, we're just going to do a tiny guide video to tell you guys what their best relics are, what their best light cone is, and how I think you should build your own Topaz and Numby. Without further ado though, let's get into the video. But before we do that, I just want to show you guys that only a small percentage of you are actually subscribed, and all you really have to do to subscribe is go down, click a little button, and it helps my channel out a lot. But without further ado, let's get back in to the video. Alright everybody, let's talk a little bit about Topaz. Now first, I just kind of want to touch on what her role is going to be in the team and how she's going to function, which of course is going to lead us into her kit. Now Topaz's role in battle is going to be sort of as a quote-unquote secondary DPS. She is not a character who you're going to be using in your primary DPS role, because you'll notice that she's not going to do as much damage as somebody like a Jing Liu or somebody like a Sele. She is going to do a tiny bit less than them, but that by no means makes her a bad character, because that's not the role she's meant to fill. The role she's going to fill is as a secondary DPS who mainly supports you with her follow-up attacks. Almost all of Topaz's attacks, or technically Numby's attacks, are going to be considered as follow-up attacks. Among every single character in the game, Topaz has the highest frequency and highest damage of follow-up attacks of any character. Now let's talk a little bit more about those follow-up attacks in her kit. So let's touch on all her abilities now. Her first ability is of course her basic attack, which is that of a basic attack, as it does 100% of her own damage to attack a single enemy. But that is of course the most bland part of her kit. Let's go into the more interesting things, like her skill. What this ability does is it causes one enemy on the field to go into a state titled Proof of Debt. In this state, any damage which the enemy receives from follow-up attacks is going to be increased by 50%, making Topaz's utility with other follow-up attack characters very, very viable, which we'll talk a little bit more on in the team setup portion of the video later. At the start of an ally's turn or during allies' actions, if there are no enemies which have Proof of Debt on the field, it will just basically cause a random enemy to get this state instead. Now, the thing that makes Topaz so awesome and so great is of course her use of Numby, which is all linked in her talent. What her talent does is it summons Numby at the start of the battle. Doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter what's happening, Numby will always be in the battle. Numby has a base 80 speed, which is super slow, but you're going to see in the talent here that it's going to kind of get rebuilt a little bit by other characters. So when taking action, Numby is going to launch a follow-up attack on a single enemy targeted with the afflicted Proof of Debt state. Also, and this is the big part, whenever enemies with Proof of Debt are attacked by your other units in the party, it's going to advance forward Numby's action by 50%. So anytime you use your Sele to attack the enemy, Numby's turn goes up. Anytime you use your Silver Wolf, boom, Numby's turn goes up, and you'll see him slowly climb in the turn order. So you're going to want to make sure to target down whichever character has the Proof of Debt state. Next, let's touch on their ultimate ability. When Topaz uses her ultimate, Numby is going to enter a state called the Windfall Bonanza state. It basically increases his own crit damage by 150% at max level, which is a crazy amount of crit damage, going to make that follow-up attack do a lot more damage. Also, when enemies with the Proof of Debt state are attacked from an ally's basic attack, skill, ultimate, really doesn't matter, Numby's action is going to be advanced forward by 50%. After Numby uses 2 attacks, he is going to exit the Windfall Bonanza state, and that will be it. You can see the actions which he will take on Topaz's little icon in the bottom left, and that will show you how many turns Numby has left of the Windfall Bonanza state. A very powerful ultimate, and if you have a good uptime on this, basically your Numby is going to be doing huge amounts of damage every single time he does a follow-up attack. Also, it's just another way to advance forward his action, making this 80 speed that he has basically non-existent. He might as well have 180 speed because of all the advanced forwards that he's getting from your other units. Now, the last part, and probably my personal favorite part of his kit, is his technique. There is 3 different parts of his technique: using it in the overworld, using it to attack an enemy, or using it in the simulated universe. Let's touch on all 3 of them. what will happen if you use it in the overworld? Essentially, you click E, boom, you summon Numby, and you're now in a state titled Explicit Subsidy. Essentially, what it's going to do for you is after Numby's first attack in the next battle, Topaz is immediately going to regenerate 60 energy, and after defeating an enemy, any enemy in the overworld, you're going to receive a small amount of credit. Now, this is very useful for free-to-play players. Finally, free-to-play players are going to have a way to play the game and grind. As you can see here in the technique description, you're able to get a lot of these credits up to a max of 10k a day, which is quite a few credits. I mean, 10k extra a day is very nice if you want to put in the effort to get all that. The second part to it is that if you use it in the simulated universe, you're actually going to receive a small amount of cosmic fragments extra with a very small chance to obtain one random curio. So basically, no matter where you're using this, it's always going to benefit you. Simulated universe, the overworld, Numby is just an all-powerful being which will give you money everywhere you go. Now, there is one more part to this which I didn't touch on, and we're going to see this right here and now. The last part of Numby's technique. If we stand right here, if we go down these stairs a little bit and run a little bit more forward and a little bit more and a little bit more. What's that over there, Numby? Numby, I know you see it, Numby. And there he goes. That is one of my favorite things about Numby. Anytime he sees a chest, he will run to it and he will immediately tell you where every chest is in the overworld. So you never have to look for chests anymore because Numby will tell you where they all are. I think it's an adorable little animation and I absolutely love it. As for the overall usefulness of it though, maybe not as much. I don't really have a hard time finding treasure, but hey, Numby enjoys it. And that is about everything I wanted to touch on in her kit. Overall, a very strong kit, a very unique one, and one that will definitely help you a lot in battle. Anyways, let's move on to light cones. Alright, let's talk about Topaz's light cones. So her best in slot light cone is without a shadow of a doubt her signature light cone, which you're going to be able to get from her limited banner titled Worrisome Blissful. What this light cone is going to do for you is increase your crit rate by 18%, which is just an all-around good buff, and all your damage from follow-up attacks by an additional 30%, but basically just a really good crit buff that has the potential to give you somewhere in the realm of a 50% overall CV buff, which is absolutely huge for Topaz. Now let's talk about the best free-to-play / low spender options. The first one which I want to touch on here is swordplay. This is a very, very viable option for Topaz, and because it is a gacha light cone and can be a little harder to get, but if you are lucky enough to get a couple of these light cones, you can get this thing to super imposition 5, which increases its damage by a lot. But essentially what this light cone is going to do for you at super imposition 1 is for every time you attack the same enemy over and over again, you're going to increase your personal damage by 8%, which is of course going to transfer to Numby as well. So if you are constantly attacking a single enemy, you have the potential to get a 40% damage buff at super imposition 1, which of course will increase drastically at the later super imposition 5. The next light cone, which I would definitely suggest again for free-to-plays or low spenders, is Cruising in the Stellar Sea. This is the light cone that you are able to get from the Simulated Universe shop. It's just another really solid light cone that increases your crit rate by 8%. And then also anytime you or Numby kills an enemy, you're going to get a 20% attack buff, which is again, is just another nice little buff that you're getting to increase your Topaz's and Numby's personal damage. Those are the three primary light cones I would suggest for Topaz and Numby above all else, but there are some other viable options which you can use. Like for example, Cele's personal light cone is of course going to be good on Topaz 2 because it has crit buffs and speed buffs and basic attack buffs and skill buffs. It can't really be bad on anybody. Only Silence Remains can be viable, although it's a little more niche. It does give a nice little attack buff and can increase your crit rate, but it's only if there's 2 or less enemies on the field, which is pretty situational, but it can work from time to time. And I would say those are about all the viable options for Topaz's light cones. Next, let's touch on her relics. For Topaz's relics, there is one really simple and obvious option, which is of course the Firesmith set. Surprise, surprise, the fire set is good for the fire character, I know. This set almost looks like it was perfectly made for Topaz as it increases fire damage by 10% as the 2-piece effect, And then for its 4-piece effect, you're going to increase your own skill damage by 12%. And then after unleashing an ultimate, you're also going to increase your fire damage by 12% too, which is just universally useful for Topaz and Numby. Now that's going to be her best in slot set. However, if you are struggling to get this 4 set, as I know a lot of people probably are, 4 sets can be hard to get. So here are a couple 2 pieces you can use instead. You of course have the option of using a 2-piece musketeer, which is going to give you some additional attack, which can be very nice. You can use the 2-piece messengers and increase your speed by a little bit, which again is just universally useful. And then if you're really struggling and you happen to have this set, you can also choose for the Thief of Shooting Meteor to increase your break effect, although that option is a little more niche compared to the other 2. Just to quickly recap, her best in slot is going to be the Firesmith set, followed by any combinations of 2 pieces which you want to go for. Next up, for her planner ornament, her best option is going to be Inner Solocido, is what we're going to say. Again, this set looks like it was perfectly made for Topaz. It increases her crit rate by 8%, and if you happen to have a crit rate of higher than 50%, you're going to increase your ultimate and follow-up attack damage, which is, the whole premise of Topaz's kit, by 15%, which is a very high value for a follow-up attack to be increased by. And you'll notice that those follow-up attacks are doing a lot more damage with this set. That's going to be without a doubt her best in slot set. There are a couple different other sets that you can use, but nothing will compare to that set. Brilliant Arena is of course a universally good set. Maybe not for Topaz as much, but it still gives a crit rate increase of 8% and a basic attack and skill damage increase of 20% if you happen to have 70% crit rate or higher. So it's just a really universally useful set and can still be viable on Topaz, although she doesn't use it as much as other characters do. Space Ceiling Station can be another good option, increasing your own attack by 12%, and then if you reach 120 speed or higher, additional 12% attack. Again, just another nice little buff. And the last option, which I would suggest if you just happen to have none of those sets, is the Celestial Differentiator, which increases crit damage by 16%. And then also if you have a crit damage of 120 or higher, you're going to increase your crit rate by 60% on your first attack. Again, not as good as the other options, but if you're really struggling, you can use this set. And that covers Topaz's artifact sets. Let's talk about the stats that she's going to want for those sets. Topaz's stats are going to be pretty simple. They're not going to be much different from any other characters. For her body piece, you're going to want either crit rate or crit damage, whatever you need to balance out her little substats here. However, you do usually want to go for crit rate, because you're of course going to get that 150% crit damage increase every time you use Numby's follow-up attack. So you're going to notice that crit rate is usually much more helpful than crit damage is, but you can opt to go for crit damage if you just happen to have enough crit rate. As for her boots, you have the option of speed or attack boots, whichever you prefer. I tend to like speed boots a little more because I like to have her in a higher place in the turn order. However, attack boots are also viable if you want to prioritize Numby's personal damage and have him do a little more every time he attacks. Next up is Fire Damage Orb, pretty self-explanatory. Fire damage, more fire damage good. And last off, you're of course going to want an attack percent rope, unless for some reason you're running her on a break effect build or something. Okay, I can't think of a reason to use anything other than attack percent. Those are all the stats you're going to want for her. As for substats on pieces, you're of course going to want to prioritize either crit rate or crit damage, followed up by attack, followed up by speed. Basically, just do the same thing you do for most characters. Try to get them to that base speed of 134. Try to get a good amount of attack and a pretty even ratio, with your crit rate outscaling your crit damage, because you're going to get a ton of crit damage from Numby's ultimate effect. Come on, Numby, get out of there. You got this. Oh, he gave up. Anyways, let's talk about Topaz's team comps. All right, as for Topaz's team comps, now we touched a tiny bit on this earlier, but I just want to go back to her traces quickly to highlight her skill ability, where it tells us that anytime we apply the proof of death state, it's going to increase any target's damage received from follow-up attacks by 50%. So we're going to want to pair Topaz with other follow-up attack units similar to herself. However, hopefully ones that are instead primary DPSs instead of secondary DPSs like herself. So some good options for primary DPSs can be characters like Jing Yuan, who also has his follow-up attack, the God Ascending Electro looking dude. Kafka, of course, also has a follow-up attack as well, although you might want to pair some other Nihility units in that team composition if you are using Kafka. Yanqing, of course, has a really good follow-up attack. Himiko also has a very viable follow-up attack, which you can also use. And then my personal favorite is Blade. I love Blade. I think he's probably the best person you can get for this team comp. Even though his follow-up attacks are a little less frequent than others, he's still really good. And then, of course, I'm sure everybody will talk about this, and I guess I have to too. You can use her with Herta, of course, although Herta is Herta, but I don't want to talk bad about Herta or else I'm going to get canceled. Next up, you're going to want some sort of Harmony/support character, or if you are going Kafka, you probably want to pair her with some sort of Nihility character. But for today's example, we're going to pair her with some sort of Harmony character. There's, of course, a lot of viable options. Characters such as Tingyun, since Tingyun doesn't take up very many skill points. Yukong is a viable option. Pele is a viable option. There is a lot of good Nihility/support units that you could pair with her. Bronya is a great option. Also, it depends a lot on what enemies you're going to be facing inside of challenges like the Memory of Chaos, for example. So, for example, if I was doing the Memory of Xianshao Stage 3, I probably want to put a team together like Topaz, and then I see the Electro weakness there. I'd want to go Jing Yuan probably, as we established earlier. And then for supports, I'd probably end up going Tingyun. And then, of course, we're going to want a healer/defender character. So I'd probably either go somebody like a Fu Xuan because they have the quantum weakness, or you could even throw in somebody like Lynx or Natasha. Just make sure to always have a support character in that 4th slot. Alright, and that about covers everything I wanted to talk about in the team setup. Last thing I want to touch on quickly for the whales of the video is her Eidolons, and are they worth it? Should you go for it? Let's talk about our first Eidolon. Future Market. Essentially, what this is going to do is increase crit damage of follow-up attacks for a certain amount of time. It's pretty decent. It can be pretty good for Topaz specifically, but because you already get like so much crit damage from her ultimate, I don't think this Eidolon is as necessary. However, it does have good value in boosting her personal DPS and support capabilities simultaneously. Next up, her Eidolon 2. Pretty simple. Anytime Numby takes an action, Topaz is going to regenerate 5 energy. It's a pretty useful ability. Honestly, it helps Topaz a lot with energy regeneration. So this is would be a decent pickup. Next, for 3 and 5 are just going to be stat increases. For 4, anytime Numby attacks, Topaz's action is going to be advanced forward by 20%. Not the biggest increase in the world, but it can be nice if you want to lower the speed total you would need on Topaz. Last, and probably the best one, is of course her Eidolon 6 for Omega Whales. It raises her damage output pretty significantly to the point where she could honestly be used as a primary DPS, even though we talked about her all video like she was a secondary DPS. This essentially changes her whole role on the team. Basically, Numby's attack during the Windfall Bonanza state is going to increase by 1, and its fire resistance penetration increases by 10%. So now you have the ability to use Numby 3 times during that Windfall Bonanza state, which is a gigantic increase. And you're also dealing increased fire damage to all enemies. It's a pretty significant buff, but it also costs about $1,000, so you can value that as you will. Anyways, guys, that is going to be the end of our video for today. I hope you enjoyed this little quick Topaz and Numby guide. If you want to see more videos like this in the future, please make sure to subscribe to the channel or like this video. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.